It's just a week since we learnt the bombshell news that Harry and Meghan are returning to the UK, and they have now touched down on British soil to start the next chapter of their life. Why are they coming back? Who's paying for their security? And is Meghan returning to the small screen? We will discuss all of those questions on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, although I'm actually in the studio next door to our normal one. Just thought I'd keep you updated on my constant movements around Broadcasting House this summer. Anyway, talking about movements, later on we're going to be joined by Caitriona Perry in Washington and Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, and we're going to theorise about why the director of the CIA popped into Moscow for a very brief, very unannounced visit on Tuesday, and some of the theories around what might be going on there. But talking of travelling, our first story on Newscast today is that Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, have touched down in the UK. They landed on Wednesday lunchtime to begin this next very UK-focused phase of their life. So what else have we gleaned? With me in the Newscast studio is the BBC's senior royal correspondent, Daniela Relph. Hi, Daniela.
Hi, Adam.
So, some more things have happened since we last spoke when the news sensationally broke last week that Harry and Meghan were moving back. They are now on British soil.
That is the big news today. Today, they are here. They have arrived. Harry, Meghan, Archie and Lilibet. They landed in the UK just before midday, we understand, at Birmingham Airport on a private jet from the west coast of America.
I was going to say, I didn't think there were many Los Angeles to Birmingham direct flights, but yeah, if it's a private jet. Yeah.
Yes, although there aren't that many Santa Barbara to Birmingham, which you could imagine when you're checking. So they came in on that flight privately, which is what we were expecting. The previous times Harry's been over on a couple of visits, he's also flown privately rather than commercially. So that, with the kids as well, that's sort of what you'd expect. We were thinking that they would be here around this sort of time. It's now probably about a week until schools start. We know that Archie and Lilibet are enrolled in a UK school, so that gives them time to settle ahead of the start of the new term. We're told the focus for the family for now is very much on settling the family, just bedding in here. We think they're going to be in the Cotswolds. Arriving in Birmingham would sort of take you in that direction as well. It's not too far from that part of the world. So
and why do we think the Cotswolds?
Together. Because it's familiar territory. They lived there in 2018. They rented a house there back then. They've got loads of friends in the area. They probably wanted to avoid the spotlight of London, perhaps. I wonder if it's just easier to operate more privately in the Cotswold, perhaps behind a gate and
or a big hedge.
Exactly. To have a bit more privacy. So I think that broadly it was easier for them to operate out of that kind of area rather than be in London, and it was slightly familiar territory as well.
Is the Cotswolds kind of a royal place? Because I'm thinking Highgrove, the King's country house, and the Queen's private residence is sort of just to the west of the Cotswolds, isn't it? So actually it's kind of regal territory. Yeah,
I mean, it very much is royal territory, I think. You have got the Queen's personal home, Ray Mill, is in the Cotswolds that she has kept, after marrying the King. The King's Highgrove estates in Gloucestershire, very much Cotswolds territory there as well. Very much the Gloucestershire Cotswolds rather than the Oxfordshire Cotswolds. And it was the Oxfordshire side of things.
You're testing my knowledge of the Cotswolds now.
The sort of Great Chew Estates, Soho Farmhouse kind of area where Harry and Meghan had been previously, where the royals tend to be the other side of the Cotswolds on the Gloucestershire side a bit. But yeah, I mean, it is very much an area that is familiar to the royal family and familiar to Harry, of course, because he spent a lot of his time growing up after the death of his mother at Highgrove with his father and with his brother. So this is an area that he has a personal attachment to as well.
And are there lots of schools around there that would be particularly set up to cater for the children of the very famous?
Well, you would
or the very wealthy?
You would think so, maybe because of the nature of the number of people that live in the Cotswolds. But it's very hard to secure any kind of school from the kind of prying eyes of the media and curious neighbours and other parents. I mean, I think the thing with security at a school for the family is, there are dozens of other, hundreds of other parents, families, siblings, neighbours to try and...
The school Facebook page.
Exactly, the school Facebook, the WhatsApp groups for every class, the parent-teacher associate, whatever it is, to be completely private and locked down is not what they're going to want to do, because they will want to I would imagine Meghan sort of immerse herself in school life a little bit, make sure her kids settle, join in, make sure they have friends, get to know families and, particularly other mums maybe. So the idea that they will, sort of remove themselves or be a bit stand back from school life, I'm not sure that will be the case. And I think there will be always be a sort of sense of exposure in the school experience.
And I saw at the end of last week, they'd written to the press regulator, Ipso, basically saying, pass on the message to newspaper editors that it's hands off our children. How much of a right have they got to demand that?
Well, I think, it slightly depends from your own media organisation and how you would approach dealing with that kind of advice. I mean, I think they are here as private citizens, effectively. They are non-working members of the royal family. They have made a personal choice to move their lives to the UK. They are not doing any kind of public-facing work. They have not... although their kids have appeared on their social media, their faces have never appeared. Yeah. We've never seen them at a public event with their mum and dad. Now, that could change. I mean, that's not to say it won't happen. But I think as things stand, they do have every right to say, please protect our children. We want time to settle. Our home is private. Our school is private for now.
Now, there was a weird subplot over the weekend that one of the reasons they'd moved back here was because Meghan wanted to start acting again and she had an actual acting job lined up, but it turned out to be a little bit less clear than that. Where have we got to?
Early talks is where we're at. We're in the very much still the early talks phase. So we had that news on Friday night that there was this potential offer of a role in the next series of The Gentleman on Netflix, which is that sort of black comedy about a duke turned drug baron of all things.
I never quite got around to watching it.
Yeah, it's good. It's quite violent. It's a bit sort of depends. I mean, it's a kind of glossy, nicely made. It's a lot of it is filmed conveniently in the Cotswolds. I think if you like that kind of thing, it's good. It's good. It's quite funny in parts. So there was this talk of a role for her there. Quite what stage of the negotiations things were at, we didn't know. Was there a sort of personal connection with Guy Ritchie that perhaps this had come through, or was this more of a formal offer from Netflix or the production company? Then Tina Brown, former editor of Vanity Fair, on Saturday, very well connected in the States, said this is all off. It's not happening. My understanding is it's not happening. But actually everybody around Meghan who I've spoken to over the past couple of days have really pushed back on that and said it isn't off. It's very much in play. Right. The conversation continues. But more interestingly, I think, to me than that specific project is the idea that she definitely wants to get back into acting. That is in the mix here. That's one of the reasons she's back and, thinking about returning to that kind of work. There've been some hints at it on various podcasty type things she's done over the past couple of years, where she has said, she, particularly after she was on Australian MasterChef,
yes,
and after she had filmed her With Love Meghan series at Netflix, she talked about loving being on set, working with a crew and a camera crew, working with a production team.
Although playing herself hasn't necessarily been that successful.
Yeah, and that had really reminded her of how much she likes that stuff. So if you were sort of, going back and trying to track the conversation around that, perhaps she was hinting at it a bit. So, but she is actively very much thinking about a return to acting, and that is very much part of the conversation.
And when I read the showbiz industry pages of the papers, occasionally you see that the stats for the streaming of Suits, her TV show that she did before she met Harry, is quite popular in certain demographics. So it might not be like a massive blockbuster hit with every age group, but it has been popular with some groups. So you could see why, if you were a streamer, she would be bankable in that sort of show.
Yeah, I mean, for teenagers, I have teenagers in my house, they've all watched Suits, sort of on every episode over the course the past couple of years, where I watched it when Meghan came into the mix with Harry for work purposes, although did enjoy it. The kids
nice work if you can get it.
Exactly, I must stay home to watch Suits. The kids and my kids have all watched it, and really, their friends have watched it. And I mean, Suits London, anyone? Suits Cotswolds? I don't know. It's not impossible. There've been lots of discussion about a revival of Suits off the back of that popularity in the sort of younger demographic. Could that happen? I suppose not impossible.
I also noticed that season 2 of The Gentleman, I think, has just dropped on Netflix. So this is quite convenient extra publicity for that.
Great publicity.
Not suggesting anything, but...
I don't think it does Netflix any harm. Actually, one of the things that Tina Brown said in her Substack post at the weekend was that the reason Meghan wasn't... the deal was off was because there was such a lot of negativity around it. I have to say... as someone who's seen a lot of negativity around Meghan in recent years, I didn't pick that up actually.
No.
I thought actually people were like, oh, I'd watch that. I'm quite curious.
Yeah,
about
because
that.
there was so much trolling about
Yeah.
her homemaking
Yes,
show,
yeah.
but there wasn't that much trolling
No,
about
I thought
this.
people were quite intrigued generally, and I didn't get a sense that there was a huge amount of negativity about a return to acting. Because I think there's just a sense, well, that is something she knows how to do. It's something she's done before. There's been some success in that area, and it sort of makes sense in terms of her trajectory to perhaps go back to that.
The other thing that's happened since we spoke last week when this news first broke is that the courts ruled that Prince Harry and the other people he was going to court with to sue the owners of the Daily Mail for phone hacking and other kind of intrusive behaviour in the past, the case that they lost. But the judges have said you've got to stump up a lot of Associated Newspapers costs, like a lot.
A lot, £9 million as an initial payment. There is an insurance policy that will cover up to £16 million, but there now has to be a further level of discussion between all parties about what that final figure is going to be. It could be up to £34 million that Harry and the others involved in that lawsuit will have to pay up to Associated Newspapers. And that is a really terrible way to have to come back to the UK for Harry. I mean, look, he is wealthy by any standards. There's lots of chatter about how much money have they got? Are they back here because there's money problems in the States? They have money. He has inheritances. He has work that he's done. They have their deals that they've done in the States with Netflix and Spotify. I mean, it's still going to be a lot of money he's going to have to pay out, well into the millions, even jointly with the others. So it's not an ideal situation for him to be in, but especially personally, that he is having to pay up that kind of cash to a media group where he has spent the past couple of decades really on a crusade against what he has viewed to be media intrusion. So to have to start this new phase of his life back here in the UK, having to pay up that kind of amount will be a real punch in the gut, I think.
And is that it for Harry's attempts to get, as he would see it, justice from the media? Or are there other legal avenues he's pursuing? Are we going to see more court cases?
Yeah, there aren't any other court cases we're aware of at the moment. So we think that this is the end of the road in terms of anything he is going to historically take on through the courts. We're not aware of any, and there's been no sense of appeal or anything like that around this particular ruling. So we are presuming once the final costs are decided here and that is paid, this will be the end of the road in terms of this crusade, for want of a better word, from Harry around media intrusion.
And is he going to have another go at getting some publicly funded security for him and his family?
He is. He would like that reviewed again through the Home Office, the government committee, the Home Office committee, RAVEC, that looks at VIP and personal protection for royalty. He wants a new assessment of his situation. I mean, you would think that may happen because the situation has changed. He is now here with his wife, with his children. They're going to school. They have a home here. His circumstances are different. So a review of Harry's security, you would think, is something that will definitely happen. Obviously, all of that is quite hard to get to because nobody discusses security. We do know that they left Birmingham Airport today without any security at all of any official kind, no police escort. I think they will bring some of their personal security that they paid for and employed in California with them here for now. Whether that lasts, it's very expensive while they're here. We don't know. But Harry would very much like to have some kind of personal security provided for him by the British taxpayer funding it while he's here.
And have we learned any more about what the king or the wider royal family think about these new arrangements?
They are saying very little, which was a bit like the position we had last week. What we're starting to see, though, is that the royal family have been on a summer break and they are now coming back to returning to royal engagements or giving us a flavour of what they're going to be doing. So, for example, we've learnt today that the king will be going on a Caribbean tour at the end of October. He's going to go to Antigua, to the Bahamas and to Guyana. And just the publication of that message now giving us a heads up about that. It's just a real sense that business as usual. We are not going to get distracted. And the king, especially in Buckingham Palace, have made it very clear that although they're really happy that Harry is back, that the king can see his grandchildren more, all of that happens privately. They're not interested in getting involved in any kind of public event or public show of Harry and Meghan's return.
And also another related family thing, Diana's brother has got a book out and he's sort of promising / threatening, depending on your point of view, to spill some beans from that period in the 90s that was raked over by everybody and feels like we know everything that ever happened between Charles and Diana and the wider royal family. Is what do we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that comes out at the end of September, Charles Spencer's book about his sister. Now, he is saying that over the years, it's the 30th anniversary of Diana's death next year, that over the years he has been asked on repeat how he feels, what he thinks, what he knew at the time, what happened, who said what, and he has decided that this is his moment to get that all down in a book, and he's going to say everything you would ever want to know from him about this situation. It will be interesting to read. I mean, as you say, you feel it's been quite exhaustive in terms of what we know about the situation around Diana and how she was treated and how her family felt. The other factor here, of course, is that Charles Spencer, is very close to Harry, to his nephew Harry. We know Meghan and Harry were at Althorpe, the Spencer estate, over the summer. He has the McCorquodales, the Fellows, who are the two sisters of Diana, have kept very much in touch with Harry and the children and Meghan. So they are in the equation here in terms of the return. So, we asked Charles Spencer if he wanted to say anything about Harry and Meghan's return. He didn't. But
wait for the book serialization.
Yeah, let's see if he does when the book comes out. Yeah,
maybe he's written a hasty introduction to cover the latest
an extra
news.
paragraph or two. Yeah.
And also, I just think maybe for younger newscasters who weren't paying attention to the news when Diana died in 1997, the really electrifying moment of her funeral was the eulogy delivered by him and co-written by Boris Johnson.
Yes. I mean, they knew each other from school. They're both at Eton together. So, I mean, that was a real extraordinary moment. And actually, when you go to Althorpe, where Diana's grave is in the lake in the middle of Althorpe, there's not much mention of Diana at all in the whole house when you do the touristing, but there are two quotes just by the lake. One is a quote from Diana, but one is what Charles Spencer said during that eulogy to his sister in Westminster Abbey, that was talked about her being, hounded and chased and how difficult her life had been. So, it was an absolute key moment in royal history, and an uncomfortable moment for the royal family, to be honest. So to have that come up again, I think, in the book will not be easy.
And just one other thing, changing of the guards today, and Buckingham Palace has got very good at sort of dipping into the news and reflecting how people are feeling. And so they played Dolly Parton. 9 to 5. Yeah, they've got really good at this. They do it all the time. So there was a little Dolly Parton medley in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace this morning for changing of the guard, which was a really nice touch. And they have, as you say, big events or key moments, or if something's happening. Although really weirdly, I was outside Buckingham Palace for the arrival of Andy Burnham, which was a Bon Jovi medley. Take from that what you will. Not the Smiths or Oasis,
no,
which
exactly,
would have been much neater.
Which was slightly odd, but yeah, it was a really nice, touching moment.
And I suppose that's quite a subtle way, or maybe some people would say it's not subtle at all, for the royal family just seeming relevant and in touch.
Yeah,
without sort of laying it on thick.
Yeah, no, and it's always. I mean, you can't look at it and not be a little bit touched and look at it quite fondly and think, oh, that's just a really nice, appropriate, good, quite joyful thing to do the morning after Dolly Parton died.
Daniela, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Now, as promised, we're going to catch up with Steve Rosenberg in Moscow and Caitriona Perry in the US because of that mystery flight that was made to Moscow on Tuesday morning by John Ratcliffe, who's the head of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which had the entire internet and the world's diplomatic corps whirring with speculation about why such a high-profile figure was doing such a low-profile journey. So let's catch up now with Caitriona, who's in Washington. Hi, Caitriona.
Hello, Adam.
And Steve is in Moscow. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Adam.
Right, before we get into what we know and don't know, should we just do a bit of a cast list here? Caitriona, just explain to us who John Ratcliffe is and how he fits into the Trump administration.
Sure. So John Ratcliffe is the director of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. He's a very loyal Trump supporter. He worked for Trump in the past. In the first Trump administration, he was the director for national intelligence. Prior to that, he was a congressman here in Washington representing the great state of Texas. Before that, he was a mayor of a city in Texas called Heath. And before that, he was an attorney working in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Texas. And part of his job there was leading investigations on counterterrorism, issues related to national security and so on. So he definitely has, let's say, the chops for a job like this. And he is in the news in the last few few hours, in the last day or two, because he made this unannounced visit to Moscow. Highly, highly unusual.
And Steve, it was interesting how the world gleaned this was happening in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, through flight radar, we found out that this American military plane had landed at Moscow's Vnukovo airport. And, suddenly this broke. Everyone was thinking, well, who's on board? Or what's on board? What's this all about? Why has an American military transport plane landed at Moscow airport? And there it sat. Eventually, through reporting from America, it became clear that John Ratcliffe had come to Moscow. But Russian officials weren't saying anything. US officials really officially on the record weren't saying anything. And in the absence of public information, all these rumours started swirling, particularly on social media. What was this all about? Was this John Ratcliffe coming to talk about Iran? Was he going to talk about Ukraine with the Russians? Was he going to deliver a warning to the Russians? There was all this talk about alleged military intelligence that suggested that Russia was going to escalate in Europe, perhaps launch an attack somewhere in Europe, and that this visit was designed to stop that. All of this for hours was swirling on social media. And then today, I managed to speak to Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, who has a daily conference call for journalists. And he suggested that, he said actually there'd been no meeting with President Putin, that's number one, and that John Ratcliffe had met Russian intelligence officials. But I asked Mr. Peskov about all these rumours, what were they talking about? Was it Iran? Was it Ukraine? Was there a warning delivered to the Russians? And he said, no comment, no more comment. So, Moscow clearly not willing to discuss too much about what had happened.
Yes, Steve, to me as an amateur in criminologist, literally, that seems that they're wanting to just not get into it, which is quite revealing in itself, because I would think normally they'd want to use your question as an opportunity to have a go either at you or Western journalists or Russia's opponents.
I think clearly these were sensitive talks, sensitive negotiations. And, the Russians often say, and Mr. Peskov often says, diplomacy likes silence, likes quiet. And so it's no real surprise that Russian officials weren't saying very much. Later, from what Donald Trump was saying, he seemed to be suggesting that the talks had focused on Ukraine. But again, very few details. We really don't know much about what was discussed. But as I say, it does appear now that there was no meeting between John Ratcliffe and Vladimir Putin. But the fact that he flew over is quite incredible. It's very rare for a CIA director to fly into Moscow. I mean, I remember just before the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, perhaps 3 months before the war began, William Burns flew in at the end of 2021. He's believed to have given a warning, right, to the Russians not to go ahead and launch this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Well, we know how that ended, with the Russians ignoring that warning and going ahead anyway.
And Caitriona, have you managed to glean anything from the American side of this?
Well, Donald Trump himself has been speaking about it. Just a couple of hours ago, he appeared on the Glenn Beck radio station. Glenn Beck is a conservative radio talk show host with a huge listenership. And he asked the president exactly what Steve asked there, actually, put all of those theories to him. Were you there trying to stave off a NATO attack? Were you talking about Ukraine? Were you talking about Iran? And so on. And the president replied to say that John Ratcliffe was there on what he called a semi-routine meeting. Now, that's interesting in and of itself, because as Steve said there, the last time a CIA director was in Moscow was in November 2021, giving that warning. So there's nothing semi-routine about a CIA director being back there. And then the president went off on a kind of ramble talking about how the war in Ukraine would never have started anyway if he'd been president, and all of that we always hear him say, right? And then he went off on another thing entirely, talking about illegal migration in the US, and then kind of came back around to finish his thought and said, well, look, John Ratcliffe wasn't there for any of those reasons that you've just mentioned, but we'll see something may come from it. So clearly there was substance to these negotiations, but we know that anyway, right? Because the CIA director would just not be going to Moscow unless it was something very serious and something very high stakes.
And Caitriona, in the interim between the meeting or the journey being revealed on flight radar and then us getting slightly more confirmation that it had happened, but not any confirmation of what the substance was, people were just trying to look for any clue they could. And people were also fixating on the type of plane that he flew on, because it wasn't your sort of standard diplomatic plane. It was a huge, big military transport plane, which people thought, oh, is there something going on there?
Exactly. And I mean, we're really in the realm of speculation and theories here, aren't we? But our editorial partners here in the US, CBS News, they did get on the record from an administration official that the US had warned Ukraine in advance that this military aircraft was going to be flying into Moscow. And they'd asked Ukraine to stand down on all attacks in the Moscow region, or any attacks on, this aircraft that they might see coming across their radar, for the duration of the visit. And then they alerted Ukraine again once John Ratcliffe in this aircraft had left Russian airspace. So, there's, I guess this, we're still in a very high risk security environment. So traveling in a plane like this was probably done for his own safety. It's very rare for anyone from the US administration to travel to Russia. There was that one visit at the end of last year by the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. They still haven't been to Ukraine. And the latest we're hearing on that is they've postponed their trip yet again because of safety issues. This is an active war zone.
And Steve, I won't get you to speculate about the contents of the meeting, but just in terms of Russia's behaviour and interest at the moment, just remind us about some of the pressures and messages that we're getting in Russia about the war in Ukraine.
The Russians are frustrated at the moment because the so-called special military operation in Ukraine hasn't gone at all to plan. What, we're 4.5 years in, and that there's no sign of victory. And they're angry with the West, they're angry with Europe, they're particularly angry with Britain for Britain's support for Ukraine. And of course, Andy Burnham was in Kiev a few days ago. That didn't go down well here, and there were some very anti-Andy Burnham articles in the Russian papers. But President Putin, if you listen to the kind of things he says, the speeches he makes, he seems to believe that, this is a war of attrition that Russia will win. And he seems determined to push on, even though he's under pressure, Russia's under pressure. The long-range Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries, on warehouses of online retailers, these are, causing a good deal of pain to the Russian economy. They're also causing some civilian casualties in Russia. But despite all of that, he seems determined to push on and seems to be confident that at some point Russia will win this.
And if the conversation was about Iran, just remind us what Russia's relationship with Iran actually is, and if they're involved at all in what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz and other things in the region.
Well, I mean, the two countries have quite a close relationship in terms of sort of military cooperation, political cooperation. They sort of have quite a bit in common. And yes, there was speculation that perhaps the United States may be looking for Russian influence over Iran to sort of help America out of its situation. But as I say, from what Donald Trump said in that radio interview, he didn't seem to be suggesting that Iran was top of the agenda there. So it appears that probably Ukraine was number one on that list being discussed at these talks. Whether it actually produces any breakthrough, that's a big question, because at the moment, from what the Russian media is saying, there's very little optimism that there's going to be some kind of breakthrough in peace talks or anything like that.
Steve, good to catch up.
Thanks very much, Adam.
And Caitriona, good to see you too.
Yeah, great to chat as always.